Right now, somewhere in the Arctic Ocean, a ship the size of a city block is cutting through ice 3 meters thick. It has been running for years without stopping, without refueling, because it doesn't need fuel. It runs on nuclear reactors, and it will keep running for 20 more years before it even thinks about stopping. These ships are called nuclear icebreakers, and most people have never heard of them, but what happens if one of them fails? Think about this. A vessel carrying 2 nuclear reactors, trapped in the middle of the Arctic thousands of kilometers from the nearest port, in temperatures of -50 degrees Celsius. No rescue ship can reach it. No helicopter can fly that far. The ice is too thick. The cold is too brutal. And inside those reactors, enough radioactive material to contaminate the Arctic Ocean for decades. The crew is trapped. The ecosystem is at risk. And global shipping routes, worth trillions of dollars, run directly through this zone. This is not science fiction. This is the reality of nuclear icebreakers, and the world is barely paying attention. So here's the question. Nobody is asking out loud. Are these ships engineering miracles or floating nuclear disasters waiting to happen? We're going to find out. But first, you need to understand what these machines actually are. The Arctic is not like any ocean on Earth. In winter, it becomes a frozen wasteland. Ice so thick, so hard, so dense that ordinary ships are simply crushed. For centuries, the Arctic was impassable, a dead zone for global trade. But the Arctic also sits directly between Europe, Asia, and North America. If you could cross it, you would cut thousands of kilometers off international shipping routes. So engineers asked a simple question. What if we built a ship powerful enough to break through? The answer was the Icebreaker, a ship with a specially shaped hull designed to ride up onto the ice and crush it with pure weight. But even the most powerful diesel icebreakers had a problem. Fuel-breaking ice burns enormous amounts of energy. Diesel icebreakers had to return to port constantly to refuel. In the middle of an Arctic mission, that was a fatal weakness. So the Soviet Union in 1959 did something extraordinary. They built the first nuclear-powered icebreaker, the Lenin. A ship powered not by diesel but by uranium. The nuclear reactor generates heat. The heat creates steam. The steam drives turbines. The turbines power electric motors. And those motors spin propellers strong enough to crush through 3 meters of solid Arctic ice and the fuel. A few kilograms of enriched uranium lasts years, sometimes decades. No refueling stops, no dependency on oil prices, just raw, continuous nuclear power. Russia currently operates the world's largest fleet of nuclear icebreakers. 7 ships. More under construction. Each one a floating nuclear power station. But Russia doesn't operate one. They operate a fleet. And that fleet is not just breaking ice for fun. It is the backbone of the Northern Sea Route, one of the most strategically important shipping corridors on Earth. The Northern Sea Route runs along the Russian Arctic coast, from Europe to Asia in roughly half the time of traditional routes, ships carrying oil, gas, coal, manufactured goods, all flowing through ice that would be impassable without these nuclear giants leading the way. Global trade, billions of dollars. Every single week, all of it dependent on a handful of ships, each carrying nuclear reactors, each operating in some of the most extreme conditions on the planet. Now here's where it gets dangerous, because these ships are aging. Some of the reactors currently operating in these vessels were designed and built during the Cold War. The technology is decades old, and nuclear reactors, no matter how well built, age. Metal fatigue, seals degrade. Radiation slowly damages the very materials holding everything together. Engineers know this, nuclear safety agencies know this, but the ships keep running. Because the alternative, shutting down the Northern Sea Route, is economically unthinkable. Let's talk about failure. Reactor leak. A seal fails. Radioactive coolant begins to escape. In a normal nuclear power plant on land, emergency teams arrive within minutes. Containment begins immediately. but on a nuclear icebreaker, in the middle of the Arctic. The nearest port is thousands of kilometers away, the nearest specialized nuclear emergency team. Even further, by the time help arrives, what happens to the crew? What happens to the ocean beneath them? The Arctic Ocean is not just water, it is one of the most fragile ecosystems on Earth, home to species found nowhere else, a critical regulator of global climate. Radioactive contamination here would not stay here. Ocean currents carry water and everything in it around the entire planet. Ice entrapment. Nuclear power gives these ships immense strength, but the Arctic is not predictable.
Ice conditions can shift in hours. A ship that was moving freely can suddenly find itself surrounded by ice that has closed in from all sides, trapped immobile, in temperatures that can kill an exposed human in minutes. The reactor is still running, generating heat, generating power, but the ship cannot move. Rescue requires another icebreaker powerful enough to break through. But if the trapped ship is deep in the Arctic route, rescue could take weeks. Weeks in -50-degree cold with a nuclear reactor running in an increasingly stressed hull. Human error. The most dangerous risk of all, these ships operate with crews of roughly 150 people. Sailors, engineers, nuclear technicians in extreme isolation, in extreme cold, under extreme psychological pressure. The history of nuclear incidents on land and at sea shows one consistent truth. Human error is always a factor. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. Every major nuclear event involved human decisions. On a nuclear icebreaker, in the middle of the Arctic, those decisions are made by people who are exhausted, isolated, and thousands of kilometers from any support. It's not like nobody has thought about this. Russia has invested heavily in safety systems for its nuclear icebreaker fleet. Multiple redundant cooling systems, automatic shutdown mechanisms, radiation monitoring throughout the vessel, emergency protocols designed for every imaginable scenario. And for decades, these systems have worked. No major nuclear incident has occurred on a Russian nuclear icebreaker. That is a genuine achievement. But here's what nuclear safety experts quietly worry about. The difference between it hasn't happened and it can't happen is enormous. The safety record exists because the ships have been lucky, because the disasters have been small enough to manage quietly, because the Arctic so far has not thrown its absolute worst at these vessels simultaneously. What happens when it does? Climate change is rewriting the rules. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Ice that was predictable is becoming chaotic. Routes that were stable are shifting, weather patterns that icebreaker captains memorized over decades are changing. The ships were designed for a specific Arctic. That Arctic no longer exists, and as the ice melts, paradoxically, Arctic traffic is increasing. More ships, more pressure on icebreakers, more missions, more risk. Now step back even further. Russia is not the only country watching the Arctic. China has built its own icebreakers. The United States, dangerously behind, is scrambling to catch up. Canada, Finland, Norway, all expanding their Arctic capabilities. The Arctic is no longer a frozen wilderness. It is a geopolitical battleground. Nations are claiming territory. Militaries are establishing Arctic bases. The Northern Sea route is being contested as a critical strategic corridor. Nuclear icebreakers are not just civilian vessels anymore. They are instruments of national power. And as geopolitical tensions rise, as more nations operate, more vessels in more extreme conditions, the probability of something going catastrophically wrong doesn't stay the same. It grows every year, every mission, every aging reactor pushed a little further past its design limits. Maritime safety agencies have raised flags. environmental organizations have published warnings, independent nuclear experts have called for international oversight, but nuclear icebreakers operate in a legal grey zone. International maritime law was not designed for nuclear-powered vessels. Liability frameworks for an Arctic nuclear incident barely exist. If a nuclear icebreaker suffers a major reactor failure tomorrow, nobody is entirely sure who is legally responsible. Nobody is entirely sure who would respond. Nobody is entirely sure the response would even be possible. These ships were built to be unstoppable, engineered to survive conditions that would destroy anything else, powered by forces that could outlast any storm. And they have delivered for decades, without catastrophic failure. But the Arctic is changing. The reactors are aging, the geopolitical pressure is rising, and the margin for error is shrinking. Every day, right now, these ships are out there cutting through ice, running on nuclear power, in one of the most remote and unforgiving places on Earth. The engineers say they are safe. The governments say they are necessary. The experts say the systems will hold. But the Arctic doesn't care what anyone says. And the question is no longer if something will go wrong. The question is whether we'll be ready when it does. Subscribe.